Hey up me duck YouTube, welcome back to another video and welcome all Derby County supporters. My second video on this channel relating to Derby County. However, this one is part of a series I've been doing, the history of your club. And my days, we need to look at our history because we're currently not in the greatest formation and look back to a happier time and maybe some bad times as well. Well, Derby County Football Club were formed in 1884 as an offshoot of the Derbyshire County Cricket Club. This was in an attempt to give players and supporters a winter interest, as well as secure the cricket club extra revenue. Very common during the time, you see. The original intention was actually to name the club Derbyshire County Football Club to highlight the link between the two clubs. However, the Derbyshire FA, which was formed a year before in 1883, objected on the grounds it was too long and therefore would not have been understood by the fans, who may mistake it for the Derbyshire FA team which it had then. Playing their home matches at the cricket club's racecourse ground. In 1884-85, the club undertook a massive programme of friendly matches. The first was a 6-0 defeat to Great Lever on the 13th of September 1884. The club's first competitive match came in the 1885 FA Cup, where they lost 7-0 at home to Walsall Town. What a great start with, wasn't it? Arguably the most important match in the club's history came in the following season's FA Cup, when a 2-0 victory over Aston Villa, already by that time an emerging force in English football, helped establish Derby County on the English football map, helping the club to attract better opposition for friendlies, and in 1888 an invitation into the inaugural Football League. The opening day of the first ever league season was the 8th of September 1888, when Derby came from 3-0 down away to Bolton Wanderers to win 6-3. How dramatic it would have been to go and see that game. Though the club ultimately finished 10th out of the 12 teams. In 1891, they absorbed another Derby club by the name of Derby Midland, who had been a member of the Midland League, leaving them as Derby's sole professional football club. Steve Bloomer, who is watching, generally considered to be Derby County's best ever player, although if you looked at my video, I didn't actually agree with that. He joined the club in 1892. In 1895, the club moved to a new stadium, the baseball ground, so called because it was previously used for baseball. Also known as the Quagmire and the Swamp and many of the muddy occasions. And that became their home for the next 102 years. It was then that the club adopted their now traditional colours of black and white. That was actually to represent the black and white timber buildings of where the club was formed in the Old Bell in Derby City Centre. Although Derby were inconsistent in the league, they finished as runners-up to Aston Villa in 1896, as well as achieving a number of third-place finishes. They were a strong force in the FA Cup, appearing in 3 finals in 6 years around the turn of the 20th century, though they lost all 3. In 1898, 3-1 unfortunately to Nottingham Forest, in 1899, 4-1 to Sheffield United, and in 1903, unfortunately, 6-0 to Bury, which stands as the largest FA Cup final defeat. The club doesn't even exist anymore. In 1906, Steve Bloomer was sold to Middlesbrough due to financial constraints, and Derby subsequently suffered its first ever relegation the following season. But under Jimmy Mevan's management, they re-signed Bloomer and regained their first division place in 1911. In 1914, they were again relegated, but instantly won the Division 2 to earn promotion. Though World War I meant they had to wait until 1919 to play First Division football again. After 2 seasons, they were relegated yet again in 1921. However, the appointment of George Joby in 1925 kick-started a successful period for the Rams, and after promotion in 1926, the club became a formidable force, with high finishes from the late 20s and all the way through the 1930s, including finishing as runners-up twice. Derby were one of several clubs to close down after the outbreak of World War II, but restarted in the early 1940s. in part due to the persistence of Jack Nicholas and Jack Webb, the two Jacks. Aided by the recruitment of Rich Carter and Peter Doherty, who had been stationed in Loughborough during the war, Derby were one step ahead of the opposition when competitive football resumed with the 1946 FA Cup, and won their first major trophy with a 4-1 victory over Charlton Athletic, which was the first ever game at which the Queen attended. The first FA Cup which the Queen had attended. I think it was also the largest scoring of goals in extra time at the time. It was also 75 years ago to this very day when that famous Jack Charlton goal took pride to Derby. The league restarted the following season after a break due to World War II, and under the management of Stuart McMillan, as well as twice breaking the British transfer record to sign both Billy Steele and Johnny Morris to replace Carter and Doherty. They finished 4th and 3rd in the 1948 and 1949 seasons respectively, before a steady decline set in and the club was relegated in 1953. After nearly 30 years in the top flight, and again in 1955, they dropped to the 3rd tier of English football for the first time in their history. It looks like it's going to be repeated, isn't it? Harry Storer led Derby back into the 2nd tier at the second attempt in 1957, though the club progressed no further over the next decade under either Storer or his successor, former Derby player Tim Ward. In 1967, well, we know what's going to happen. Brian Clough and Peter Taylor took over and led them to their greatest glory. Having clinched the influential signing of Dave Mackay, Derby were promoted to the First Division in 1969, and they finished 4th in 1970. They were banned from competing in Europe due to financial irregularities in 1971, and won their first ever Football League Championship in 1972. Though Derby did not retain their title the following season, they did reach the semi-finals of the European Cup, where they lost to Juventus. Clough's frequent outspoken comments against football's establishment eventually led to him falling out with the board of directors of the club, and Clough and Taylor left in October 1973. Such was their impact on the club that 37 years later, a 9-foot or 2.75 metres bronze statue of the pair was erected outside of Pride Park in commemoration of their legacy. Despite the departure of Clough and Taylor, Derby's league success was repeated in the 1974-75 season when they won the title under successor Dave Mackay, who had been a player under Clough when they had returned to the top flight in 1969. However, Derby's form declined towards the end of the 1970s, and they went down into the 2nd Division in 1980 after a string of managers, including former Manchester United boss Tommy Doherty, unsettled the club, trying desperately to retain its place at the top of the First Division. Though they challenged well in their first season, Derby was soon hit hard by rising debts, failing attendances and dismal performances. Peter Taylor returned to the baseball ground as manager in early 1983 and kept Derby up that season, but he retired a year later, just before Derby's relegation to the 3rd Division for only the 2nd time in their history. However, Derby did manage to avoid going out of business, and they were soon under the ownership of wealthy businessman Robert Maxwell. Of course, he wasn't really that good, was he? No. Yes, I can hear the booze. After relegation to the 3rd Division in May 1984, the club appointed Arthur Cox as manager. Although they missed out on promotion in Cox's first season as manager, they then won back-to-back promotions and were back in the First Division for the 1987-88 season. Oh, what we could do with a manager like him at the moment, eh? With attendances also rising as the club's on-the-field fortunes and financial position improved. The financial backing of new chairman Robert Maxwell saw stars such as Peter Shilton, Mark Wright, Dean Saunders, Trevor Hebard and Ted McMinn brought to the club, and they finished 5th in the 1988-89 season. A lack of any further investment, though, from Maxwell quickly led to a decline, culminating in relegation back to the 2nd Division in 1991. At this time, local businessman Lionel Pickering became a major shareholder of the club, taking control just before Maxwell's death in November 1991. In November 1992, Derby County paid £2.5 million for Notts County central defender Craig Short at the time and for 5 years afterwards. The most expensive player to be signed by a club outside the top flight, and indeed one of the highest fees paid by any English club for a player at the time. Well, that clearly would have worked, eh? Other expensive signings included the strikers of Tommy Johnson and Marco Gabbiadini. Cox's resignation as manager in October 1993 saw the appointment of legendary former player Roy McFarland as manager. Derby reached the final of the Division 1 playoffs that season, but were beaten by local rivals Leicester City. McFarlane was sacked a year later after Derby missed out on the playoffs, and his replacement was Jim Smith, or the Bald Eagle, a manager whose track record at his previous clubs included 4 promotions and an FA Cup semi-final appearance. Although the 1995-96 season started slowly, the signing of sweeper, although it wasn't known as it at the time, Igor Stimac in the early autumn proved pivotal. Smith guided the Rams to a second-place finish and the Premier League, now the top flight of English football. During that season, it was announced that Derby would be leaving the baseball ground after more than 100 years. While I'll just mention it there, I'll just mention the fact that during that time, the penalty spot actually had to be painted on during one of the matches. It was so muddy that the groundsman came on and had to measure out where the penalty spot was. And they moved into a new all-seater stadium following earlier plans to develop the baseball ground as a 26,000-seat stadium. After finishing in 12th place in their first season back into the top flight, the club left the baseball ground and all its legendary memories behind, with it being its home for 102 years. They moved into the new 33,597-seat Pride Park Stadium, which is Premier League standard and really should have better days seen on it than next season, maybe Gillingham at home or something. I don't know. For the 1997-98 season. The baseball ground was demolished 6 years later, and a memorial was eventually erected in memory of its role in the Derby City's history. It does look quite sad for itself at the moment, to be fair. The club settled well into its new home, and as it recorded back-to-back top 10 finishes for the first time since their 1970s peak, before sudden decline at the turn of the millennium saw 3 years of struggle. Smith resigned to be placed by former players Colin Todd, who lasted just 3 months, and John Gregory, before the Rams were relegated after a 6-year stay in the top flight in 2002. Derby County's relegation saw the club enter a serious financial crisis, which forced them to sell many key players. Gregory was later suspended from his managerial duties over alleged misconduct, and a former Ipswich town boss, George Burley, was brought in. He seemed to do an all-right job, I suppose. The club was put into receivership and then sold in October 2003 for only £3 to a group led by Jeremy Keefe. After finishing 20th in the 2003-04 season, a dramatic improvement in the 2004-05 season saw Derby finish 4th in the Championship, qualifying for a playoff spot, though they lost in the semi-finals to Preston North End. Soon afterwards, Burley resigned, citing differences between himself and the board. He was replaced by Bolton Wanderers first-team coach Bill Brown. In January 2006, Brown was sacked after a poor run of results. Terry Wesley, the academy coach at the time, took over first-team duties until the end of the season and saved Derby from relegation. In April 2006, a consortium of local businessmen, led by former vice-chairman Peter Gadsby, purchased the club, reducing its debt and returning Pride Park Stadium to the club's ownership in the process. In June 2006, former Preston North End boss Billy Davis, who was actually very good at the time, although later had his name tarnished, was appointed Derby County's new permanent manager. In his first season, Davis took Derby to the Championship playoffs, where they beat Southampton on penalties in the semi-finals, before defeating West Bromwich Albion 1-0 with a second-half Stephen Pearson goal at the new Wembley Stadium to secure a return to the Premier League and the associated £60 million windfall. After failing to win any of their opening 5 matches of the season, 1 draw and 4 consecutive defeats, Derby scored their first victory with a 1-0 win over Newcastle, where Kenny Miller scored the only goal of the game. I'm trying to look over light, guys, in it. It's not that great. In October 2007, Peter Gadsby stepped down as chairman to be replaced by Hull City owner Adam Pearson, who immediately began searching for investment from overseas. After a poor start to the season, manager Billy Davis left by mutual consent in November. He was succeeded by, quite frankly, probably one of the worst managers Derby has had for a long time, of Paul Jewell, who failed to save the club as Derby suffered the Premier League's earliest ever relegation in March. That is just one stat of many, by the way. They also recorded the Premier League's lowest ever points total and equalled Loughborough's 108-year Football League record of going through an entire season with only 1 win. Which, by the way, that occurred back during the 1899-1900 season, when Loughborough finished bottom of the second division. In January 2008, Derby was taken over by an international investment group led by General Sports and Entertainment, with Pearson remaining as de facto chairman. Derby's match at home to Sheffield United on the 13th of September 2008 generated much media coverage as it was approaching a year since Derby's last league win, a run which was saw the club break the English league record for the most matches without a win. Well, we're just such an embarrassment, aren't we? Just 4 days short of the anniversary of a 1-0 victory over Newcastle United, Rob Hulse scored against his former club as Derby actually ran out 2-1 winners. Unbelievable. Earning Paul Jewell his first league win as Derby boss at his 27th attempt. 27 games it took him to win. Despite taking the club to the League Cup semi-final, to be fair, it was a bit of a bright spot that during the season. That was the club's first major cup semi-final since 1976. Derby lost 4-3 to Manchester United over 2 legs. Jewell resigned as manager in December 2008 after a run of just 2 wins in 11 matches. He was replaced by Nigel Clough, a son of former manager Brian Clough. Was it straight after him? I didn't realise there was a straight one there. Nigel Clough led the club to 18th place and safety in the Championship. After 4 years of mid-table obscurity, Clough was replaced by Steve McLaren in September 2013. McLaren led the club to a 3rd-place finish in the 2013-14 season, but as everybody keeps on harking back to in the city, they lost the playoff final to Queen's Park Rangers. Oh, how different it could have been if Keogh didn't mess up, if Bryson was brought on short earlier or actually started the game. So many endless combinations, and it plays over Derby's heads over and over again. The following season, local businessman and current owner Mel Morris assumed ownership of the club. Morris initially oversaw a level of spending unprecedented in Derby's history, breaking the club's transfer record 4 times in his first 3 years, but also oversaw an equally unprecedented managerial turnover as he went through 9 managers in 5.5 years. That is just ridiculous. Between June 2015 and January 2021. In this period, the club endured 3 unsuccessful playoff campaigns, failing in the semi-finals twice and losing in the 2019 final to Aston Villa. In October 2020, it was announced that Morris was intending to sell the club and was actively seeking new owners. It had the whole BZI scandal, and now there's Eric Alonso, who knows what he will do with the club. Just before I end, I want to bring in this little fact which many of you might not know. Archie Goodall was the first ever footballer for England to wear contact lenses, and he also played for Derby at the time. Just a little interesting fact. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you do enjoyed. Please subscribe for wanting a bit more footballing content. I'm going to have on Sunday the clubs which I believe should have been managers which should have been sacked this season at various clubs. And a history of your club does continue with Huddersfield Town, I think, next week. So goodbye for now.